Hi, everyone. My name is Becca Oliver. I'm the Executive Director at the Writers League of Texas. And thank you so much for being here with us tonight for our May 3rd Thursday. This is an event that we do every month, except when we decide we have a conference and we're a little too stressed to do it. So we won't be doing it next month in June. But every month we like to pull together writers who we admire, folks who have cool, interesting perspectives, interesting things happening with themselves and their work to talk about a particular topic of interest to writers. So tonight, here we are talking about adaptation, going from book to screen. I'm so excited for this amazing lineup of panelists. So I'm going to introduce them to you, and then we are going to jump into it. First up, Louis Bayard is the author of The Pale Blue Eye, adapted into the global #1 Netflix release starring Christian Bale. Jackie and Me, ranked by the Washington Post as one of the top novels of 2022, the national bestseller Courting Mr. Lincoln, Roosevelt's Beast, The School of Night, The Black Tower, and Mr. Timothy, as well as the highly praised young adult novel Lucky Strikes. A New York Times notable author, he has been nominated for both the Edgar and Dagger Awards, and his story Banana Triangle 6 was chosen for the Best American Mystery Stories. His reviews and articles have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, and Salon. An instructor at George Washington University, he is the chair of the Penn-Faulkner Awards and was the author of the popular Daunting, I don't know if is that outdated? Am I outdated bio here? I don't know. Louis, I apologize if I am. He's the
It's
chair of the
past tense.
Penn-Faulkner
It's past
Awards
tense.
and was the author of the popular Downton Abbey recaps for the New York Times. His work has been translated into more than a dozen languages. Please welcome Louis Bayard. I know. Some impressive folks we've got for you tonight, guys. May Cobb is an award-winning author of The Hunting Wives, My Summer Darlings, A Likeable Woman, and Big Woods. Her books have received attention from Book of the Month, The Today Show, and Oprah Daily, and have been optioned, as we'll talk about tonight, for film and television. She has an MA from San Francisco State University, and her essays and interviews have appeared widely, including in the Washington Post and Good Housekeeping. She currently lives in Austin, Texas. She's a treasure and such a cool, inspiring person in our literary community here. Please welcome May Cobb. Thanks for being here, May.
Thanks for having me, Becca.
And then we have Owen Egerton, the writer and director of 3 feature films, Follow, Bloodfest, and Mercy Black. As a screenwriter, Egerton has written for Fox, Disney, Warner Brothers, HBO. He's written several novels, including The Book of Harold, The Illegitimate Son of God, and Hollow, which is one of my favorite books of 2017, but was also named one of the best books of 2017 by NPR. Egerton is also one of the comics behind the Alamo Drafthouse Master Pancake Theater, and one of the coolest people you'll ever meet, and someone that we love having in our community, even if he's no longer here in Austin. So please welcome Owen Egerton.
Thank you,
Thanks for being
guys.
here, Owen.
Well, I'm pretty thrilled with your panel here. I mean, Louis and
It's
May
a
are
good
two
one.
writers I just adore. So
So our topic for tonight, and I want to mention to the folks who are listening in, be sure to drop your questions. We have a Q&A box, so that's the best place for your questions as we go. I have a feeling you'll have many. What do they have on the craft services table, maybe being one of them. But be sure to drop the questions in the Q&A box. We'll get to them, as many of them as we can at the end of the conversation. But we're here tonight. Our topic is adaptation, going from book to screen. And I think as writers, this brings up all sorts of questions for us. Things like, what happens when you've written something and Hollywood comes calling? How involved can and will and should an author be when that happens? What does a TV and film deal or a TV and film actually happening mean for the life of your book later? And of course, at what point do you move to Bel Air, get a Soho House membership, and just consider yourself a superstar? So, so many questions to answer tonight, and many more that we're going to get to. But I want to start with an opportunity to really get to know each of our panelists a little bit better with from the entry point of this topic, obviously, and a very specific adaptation in the case of each of them. So I want to start with you, Louis, and ask you just an opening question about The Pale Blue Eye and your experience with that. And the first question, and I think the one that a lot of folks, I imagine, think about happening to them. The first question being, what was that? Well, first of all, tell us a little bit about the story, and then the story behind the book itself, but what that call was like when you heard that book now, this book that is so beautiful, by the way, such an amazing book, was going to be adapted for the screen.
Okay, so much to unpack there, but so the book was written 15 years ago, and it's a gothic thriller mystery about Edgar Allan Poe when he was at West Point in circa 1830. And involves cadets having their hearts carved out of their bodies and stuff like that. Stuff that Poe would have warmed to. And so in the year after, a year after it came out, it was optioned. I need to pause here and explain what an option is for folks out there in the world. An option is not a green light. It is so not that. An option is just somebody saying, we're going to take your property and go away for a year and try to make something happen out of it. And 99.9% of the time, nothing happens. That is the kind of realism of the world, is like there's so many stars need to align for anything to happen. So nothing happened. And then the same guy came back 15 years later, and it was 15 years later, and said, his name was Scott Cooper, and he was the writer director. And let's option this again. And like, okay, whatever. Agents and editors caution you never to spend a second thinking that your book is going to become a movie or a limited run series or whatever, because the chances against it are so extreme. So I was like, yeah, whatever. And then a few months later, there was an article in the Hollywood Reporter saying that Christian Bale was on board. 2 weeks later, there was an article in be clear, I was in none of these rooms when this was happening. The author is not essential to these negotiations. He has already forfeited control of his property through the option. So I learned about it the same way everybody else did, through journalism.
Wow.
And then Christian Bale's on board, and then there's a whole other cast on board. So
and then it really just starts to, once you start to attach stars and you start to have these other things happen, it
yes,
really
and I had zero control over that entire process. I was not there in any room.
All right,
but
we're going to circle back to you with
circle back
for a lot of these points along the way. But thank you so much, and I think we can take a moment to acknowledge that 15 years is a pretty long period of time for, first of all, for an option to just be something that someone is still thinking about that property 15 years later, but then to have it really happen after 15 years is so cool. And
so unusual.
Yeah.
So unusual. I should say Walter Tavis, who wrote The Queen's Gambit, has been dead for how many years? That's how long it took that option to come to fruition. Yeah.
Wow. So May, we're going to move over to you, and so much that we could talk to you about with your work and the great and exciting things that are happening, but we're going to focus on The Hunting Wives, of course, because I imagine it's been a whirlwind of the last several months for you. And so can you set it up for us a little bit, the story, the story of what The Hunting Wives is, and then what that was like for you, that call, that moment where you realized, wow, this may become a television show.
Yeah, so The Hunting Wives is basically, it's been described as Big Little Lies, but with martinis and guns. And I think that's the best way to say, it's set in East Texas. It's rich socialites behaving badly, and it's the book of my soul. No, it's the book of my dark soul. No, but it's so and it came out in 2021. Anyway, it got optioned in 2019, shortly after we sold the publishing rights, but then that fizzled. And then a new producer swooped in and optioned it, thank goodness, December 2020. But I got the call for sure that it was happening 2 days after the writer's strike ended.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right, so something maybe was put on hold and then greenlit after that strike, huh?
Yeah, and the writers' room had been underway. They had written about half the scripts, but man, I was sweating that strike. Of course, every screenwriter. I'm not a screenwriter, just aspiring, but so many shows got canceled, and so it was nothing I was counting on. I was hoping it would survive. But wow, when I got that call, it was like I really I was having a terrible day, to be perfectly honest. And the call was just, it was one of those magical moments where yeah.
And this is a big deal. I mean, this is Stars, it's a network, and it's Malin Ackerman, right? And I'm especially excited, Dermot Mulroney,
Yeah.
of, my childhood, Brittany Snow, someone from Scandal. So a pretty cool cast who's also involved in a lot of articles on Deadline about more people being added every week or so. So it's a big
Yeah.
deal, May, and I'm so excited to dig a little bit more into your experience with that. But Owen, I want to switch over to you. And you have such a varied biography, of course, and list of experiences, wear a lot of different hats, as they say. Screenwriter, published author, director. But I know I was thinking, for the purposes of just digging a little deeper into a particular project, that it would be great to talk about the film that you have coming out pretty soon based on your short story. But does that feel like a good one for you? Are you up for kind of giving us a little information about the sort of
Yeah,
evolution? Does
I
that
can do
feel
that.
good?
I mean, I think,
And I especially like the way it came about in terms of the story itself and how the story then evolved into a film.
yeah, that's a good one. Is it? Because I mean, I think Louis said some really good things. Because, like, I've had a bunch of different things that have been optioned, including like Book of Harold got optioned, and all these different, and then they don't, nothing happens with them, or things do. They go through. It's not just one failure. It's like you would then allow moments of hope, and you just get slapped again, like, and then you stand up and they slap you again, and you say thank you and leave the room. Um, but of this most recent one, so it was a short story that I wrote called Untimely, and it's a horror short story about basically a group of teenagers who find this cursed whistle that basically when you blow it summons what would eventually have been your death. So you're haunted and hunted by everyone's individual death. And I wrote this story, I guess a bit over a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. And with this one was interesting. I actually, instead of sending it out to journals or places to get published, I sent it to my management team, because I already recognized like this would make a great movie in my thinking. And so we sent that out without it being published. I sent it basically like I worked with also my book agent, but we sent it out as like, what would this be as a film with me attached to write it? And it went to a bunch of different places, and I had a bunch of different meetings, and I eventually worked with a company called No Trace Camping that I really liked, and I liked the guys there, and I had a relationship with them already. And they made a deal for me to write it. And as May pointed out, there was this writer's strike coming up, and I'm part of the WGA. And so I kind of quickly wrote the draft, and I was like finishing it up. And I said, I handed it over to them 2 days before the strike started. And I said, listen, there's going to be a strike, and I'm not going to be able to talk to you. So take this now, because you have it now, and good luck. And they were sort of able to do all this work. It ended up sort of being a Canadian, because they're a Canadian company, Canadian deal. So they weren't affected by SAG as much. They filmed it up in Canada, but basically I kind of heard rumors like, someone's auditioning for this movie, and like, oh, what wonder that is. And it was only after the strike ended that they said, we've attached Corin Hardy, who's a really brilliant director. I think he did The Nun, among other stuff. And it's happening. And they're going to go into production in a couple of months. And that's when Corin and I started working, but I couldn't even work on it till after that. And that was a bit different, because I was a short story writer, but I was also the screenwriter on that one. So it was own weird kind of experience. But it was really great getting to sort of have that kind of come out of the writer's strike and find that happening, and then kind of be able to jump right into it. Interestingly, and this is just the last thing I'll say on this one, as Corin and I were working, and he was working with the actors, he knew that I was also a short story writer and a novelist. And he said, could you write kind of little bits for each of these actors about who is this character? So I wrote these mini short stories for each of the characters, basically about their life, about the motivation, about something that had happened to them, stuff that's not in the movie, but it's like aspects of the characters. And I really enjoyed that process. It was great to kind of give this character of like, here's something that happened to you when you were 6 years old that might help you understand the character. And I really
Right.
liked
And cool for those actors, I'm sure, to have the person who knew those characters best, giving them a little bit of a sketch to go from. So I want to talk to each of you then about involvement. And I think you each probably have different experiences on this with the projects that we're talking about. But Louis, to go back to something you said, which was, I was outside of those rooms, all of this stuff was happening without my input. But yet when I look at that film, and there are clear places where the film and the book differ, of course, it's a 400-page book and it's a 2-hour film, but it feels like they really were, very loyal to the feel of the book, to many, even some lines that seem to have been pulled directly from the novel itself. And so I guess, and then I read a story you said in an interview about going to the premiere and your friend being really mad because nobody was coming up to you to talk to you, and you were the author of this book. So I guess to just give folks a sense of, as the author, was there a moment where you were more involved, or did you feel like that was fine with you? You wanted it to just happen as it was going to happen?
Well, I was involved, and that was strictly because of Scott Cooper, who was the writer-director. He was incredibly generous and welcoming, and asked for my input from the very start. Again, I can't tell you how unusual that is in Hollywood. So many of my author friends have had books adapted for whatever format. They get shut out very early on. It's like, here, give us your little property and we're going to take it. So I was very lucky to have Scott, and it was very clear from the start that he wanted to be faithful to the book and include dialogue from the book. He told me later it was the most dialogue he's ever had in a script, which I took as a perverse compliment. And so, yeah, I wound up, I think he sent me the first draft, and his words were tear it apart, which I thought was so generous and also confident. I don't think Quentin Tarantino would say that to people. Yeah,
No.
tear apart my script. So I really felt like I was part of it. I visited the set for a day, and it was, nobody's going to buy me a beard for this story because it was lovely.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I think people who are listening are thrilled.
But I can't emphasize how unusual that is. There are so many bitter authors out there whose work was taken and trashed, or they were just left out in the cold. So again, this is a very unusual circumstance. And I know.
Well, and then sticking with you, because there are big-ish moments that differ a lot from the book too, and even some characters who maybe their I don't want to say level of evil, but they're just different ways they're portrayed in the film versus in the book. And so I am wondering what that was like for you to see the finished product and to see some of those darlings of yours maybe killed or left.
The darlings, right? So I think one of the reasons that Scott invited me in was because I was ready to kill darlings. I love movies, and I understand that it's a completely different medium, and I found it incredibly stimulating to figure out how to take a story from one medium to another. And I found it absolutely fascinating to see how it would happen. So I was on board with all of it. In fact, I was the one saying, maybe we should get rid of the poem. Maybe we should get rid of this. Maybe we should get, all this stuff, because I just wanted to I think we both had the same impulse, which was just to make it work. And so the movie that was on the screen was the movie that I saw being made. I was there through successive drafts. And again, that's strictly because of Scott Cooper's generosity and openness to that. but it was an exercise in seeing how a movie gets made, and I was grateful for it.
Yeah, and 15 years after the publication, there were probably people who read the book and they said, "Oh yeah, totally exactly what happened in the book." It took 15 years.
Well, it's funny because you realize when a movie comes out, there are all these articles. There are at least 4 or 5 articles comparing the movie to the book, saying, "What are the differences between?" And it's like I'm fascinated that people go to that length, because I haven't even read the book since it first came out. So I'm it's like, oh, right, oh yeah, that did happen differently. Yeah, the climax. Oh yeah, that was a little different. So, I
Yeah,
I didn't feel sacred about the original text at all. I just wanted it
great.
to be a good movie.
So May, I want to talk about your involvement because you are an executive producer on this show, right? I guess for the folks who are listening, what does that mean? It sounds very important. It
I want
sounds
to
like
know too,
you
because I
are,
got it too, and I don't know how I got it.
yeah,
May go.
yeah. What is you? So you folks, you have your IMDb profiles now, but what does that even mean? And then how involved have you been in this process?
Gosh, I really think it's one of those titles that could mean either very involved or sort of, just not involved at all kind of.
Anything. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And like um it's my involvement has been pretty much like Louis, Louis, I'm sorry, I'm like so tired. No, but tell me how to pronounce
Louis, right?
Louis.
Or Lou,
Like
yeah, whatever.
like Louis was saying that the showrunner and the writer, in my experience with The Hunting Wives, is so gracious that she's let me be a part of it. And I don't think that that's that common. I mean, I don't know. I've heard horror stories too about that not being the case. So I feel fortunate. I'm not making, casting decisions or big, executive decisions, but that's fine because I'm not a veteran. And so I feel like I'm here to learn, and grateful that I've, been allowed to be as much a part of it as I have been.
And were you a part of meetings? I know that you have a showrunner that you're really excited to work with, right? And Rebecca Cutter, I believe, is her
Yes.
name. And it seems like there's been it's been such a good experience for you and just watching you through your social media, May. But were you in meetings early on to sort of hear what these folks had, what their thoughts were for the book? Was there a point where there was the wooing process that can sometimes happen with options and sales, where folks want to let you know a little more about what their vision is to make sure you are excited about it?
Yeah, I mean, definitely with the producer, a man named Erwin Stoff, when he called to say he was interested, this is the second person that optioned the book. He sort of gave me, told me his vision, and I loved it. And then he told me pretty much a few months later he wanted to try to get Rebecca attached. And then very soon after that, he flew her to Texas. And so I took her to East Texas to go like skeet shooting and riding around on a boat and doing East Texas things. And she then told me, like when we were driving around the backcountry, her vision, her sort of take on it, that she was going to pitch to stars. And she's like so nervous to tell me because she does, do some different things. And I was like, no, run with it. I love this. This is why I didn't say, oh, I have to be the one to write this, because again, I'm just aspiring screenwriter and she's been doing this for 20 years. And but it was lovely to hear. And I think we spent the weekend, and I guess you could call that involvement, because it was my best friend and I taking her around and really trying to show her how it really is. And
That is cool, May. I love that you were able to do that. And I love that there was just that sort of them showing that enthusiasm from the start, that it was important to be there on the ground for her to see East Texas, where this book takes place, and also to get to talk to you about it.
yeah, I think it really helped her. I mean, it's weird. I mean, we were just there 48 hours, and my best friend that was with me was like, it's like she grew up there. because we couldn't believe how East Texas she's made it. I mean, I was like, you know, and the other thing that was really cool, and Owen knows that I've been wanting to break into screenwriting, so he gets like all these phone calls from me. Well, how do I, what do I, you know? And so he's heard all this before, but she invited me to be a part of the writer's room, like a fly on the wall. So, and it's all on Zoom still, at least for them it is. And so I was able to sit in on some of those and see how what a writer's room looked like. And I don't know, it looks really cool. I hope I can, get in there one day.
Yeah, and so, and we're going to come back to you about especially the East Texas of it. But and first, I'm just going to ask you, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
to maybe tell folks what is a writer's room?
So a writer's room, like television shows, have a group of writers. It could be three, it could be, one, but 3 to 17 could be huge, that are writing the show together. So when you see a show and it says written by, that's someone who's in the writer's room. But the show has been often led by a showrunner who is often the head writer and is the most important person associated with the television show, as opposed to a director in it, like who is comes and goes. The showrunner is seeing the show through, and they run a room that sometimes is just like this on Zoom. And they sort of like, okay, we know we want to do this with season 1. We know we want to do this. Like, what if there's an episode where this happens and this happens? Like, I love it. May, you go write that one. Like, okay, what if in episode 8 this happens? Oh, great, great. Becca, you run off and write that one. And often the showrunner is working and rewriting a bunch of those after that. But that's kind of the room. And you
Yeah.
think, like, when a novel gets picked up and like, we want this novel to be a show, like, well, wouldn't we first go to the writer? But as May's pointed out and Lou pointed out, no. I mean, often they don't want the writer involved, because the writer's like, I know my baby. And the last person they want, like, you have to reinvent this. You have to. And so, I mean, when I've worked on the other side as a screenwriter, adapting someone's screenplay, and like, do you want me to talk to the writer? And like, no, they might have opinions, and we don't want that. So I think it's actually, it's really cool, the people that May and Lou have worked with that have really supported that. I think it's been really great.
Oh, and
Yeah,
how long has the showrunner been a thing? I feel like the showrunner is just a function of the last 20, is it 15, 20 years?
Yeah, it's right. The history of it, like when it became a name, because I think it was sort of a head writer for a while. And then it sort of grew. They realized that this head writer was often on set, and the head writer was the person they were going, well, what color car does she drive? As opposed to the director, because a director comes in for one episode, the writer in TV sits next to the director and says, like, hey, this and this. In film, often the writer's not allowed on set,
Right.
like even the screenwriter, like once it's given to the director's in charge along with the producer. So it's kind of developed, and we hear about them more and more, of like how important a showrunner is.
And there's certainly, I mean, all of this starts with a contract, right? So when a book is optioned, there are terms that are set. And as someone had asked in the chat box earlier, often, yes, there is some amount of money that's going to change hands. And then with a promise of more money down the road. But there are moments where for writers who it's really important to them that they adapt their own work or be a part of the screenwriting process or a part of the room, that is something, I say it, I see Owen looking at me, it's something that could be negotiated. It's just often not going to be negotiated in. It's not realistic for anyone to think, I'm going to be able to say that if you option this, I will have a part of the creative process, like a significant part of the creative process.
So my first book to get optioned, and I was super excited, was Book of Harold. And Book of Harold, at that point it was Soft Skull. And so, a really press I love, but not a huge big press. It wasn't a huge big book or anything. But I got a call from Warner Brothers. So Warner Brothers Television wanted to option it. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's great. I'm a screenwriter. I've been working on part of the WGA. And they're like, that's fantastic. We're going to go look for a writer now. I'm like, oh, but about me? I'm like, if you want to give us a pitch, that's fine. But I had to audition like everybody else. And I don't think actually I had a heel up because I had written the book. I think it was quite the opposite. I think they're like, well, okay, we're gonna be nice to you. I actually got the gig in the end, so I did take it out. I was the writer who took it out in a way, but they weren't more eager to talk to me because I had written it. I think they were apprehensive because, as Lou said, a film, a TV show, that is a different beast, and if you were going to make a painting based on a song, you wouldn't necessarily want the songwriter to be the one holding the brush. And that's how they feel, which
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
I think the exception, Owen, is when like some book has been so monstrously successful, like Gone Girl.
Yes.
I think if Gillian, I never knew.
I think it's Gillian, but
Gillian, anyway, and that book was such a monster hit that I think she could basically stipulate that.
Yes.
Most authors, again, 99.9% of authors cannot do that. They're just
right.
great. Somebody's
If you're in a bidding war and everybody in
Yeah.
town wants to do Gone Girl, they will
Yeah.
make a chair for you in the old writer's room so that you could be a part of it.
Can
So
I add on to that though,
yeah,
real quickly,
of
Becca?
course.
Because I know some of the writers who are right now here, because I've seen them in the chat, have had experiences very recently where someone's come to them and said, well, I want to make this a movie and I'm so excited, and have made them feel so small and like, well, you don't understand this industry. And so what you need to do is pay me to get this going and pay me to find a writer and pay me or stuff. That's a lie. That's a lie. You should really respect. I mean, I talk about the disrespect and Lou as well. And Matt, we all have, but you're not due that disrespect. And so be wary. You created something of value that they want. You've created a story, and that's a very exciting thing. And you should hold yourself to that value and be aware that there are people who are going to try and take advantage of you. Like that, I hope that's not news, but the film industry is filled with people that want to take advantage of you, and they will. They'll try and steal your story, steal what's of work of value that you've made, and say like, no, you're not valuable, and you've got to be wary of that, and that's important too.
Yeah, and you can always say no, right?
You can always say no.
It's hard.
I know. It's like, I mean,
if
it's
someone's
almost
throwing some money at you for, yeah.
well, and sort of the parallel conversation we often have with writers about signing with a literary agent and the ability you can say no, they're going to say a lot of things to you, but you still, at the end of the day, you have this opportunity in hand, and it's scary to think you won't have it down the road. But I do want to talk just briefly, and then I have so many questions for you guys. But Lou, what I also love about this beautiful world of adaptation, book to film, is that the film then becomes a way for readers to find a book and an author, maybe, whether it's the author or whether it's the book, whether it's the author's other works, and it's an opportunity to slap a lovely movie still on the cover and re-release the book in paperback or what have you. So could you talk to us a little bit about that experience for you? This book, especially 15 years, after you wrote it and it was published, what did that look like for the life of The Pale Blue Eye after the movie?
Well, my grandfather used to refer to as mailbox money. Is the money that just comes without you doing anything, it just comes. So one of the things that happened interestingly was they resold all the foreign rights to the book. So it got republished again. And Italy is excited about a 15-year-old book, which is fascinating to me again. And again, I'm not in those rooms when this is being discussed, but I think I wish every author could experience this, as having a book that you've thought was behind you kind of getting a second life, because and again, it's just luck of the draw. It's this one guy, Scott Cooper, who came at it twice and finally made it work. But no, it's only a good thing. I will say that when the movie first came out, I was like sweating that, because there's so many more reviews for a movie than for a book. So I was sweating that a lot. And my agent finally said, there's no downside to this. There's no downside for you to this. No matter, this could be like the Ishtar of all movies. It doesn't matter. This is a good thing. And so I came, but I didn't read the reviews because that was just too much. Book authors don't get reviewed nearly as much as film books don't. Yeah, so I had to kind of silo myself from that stuff.
Right. And, there's always that world of folks who, whether they see a movie or not, they probably read reviews, and then often that can point them to the book itself versus the film. I mean,
It's only good.
I read your novel after seeing the movie, and I think that one of the delights that many of us, I'm sure, experience is when you see a film and you read the book, and for different reasons, you have still a really pleasurable, entertaining experience, but one or the other doesn't take away from the other experience. And I think with your book and film, that is absolutely true. And Christian Bale just acts the hell out of that cool and really tough, challenging role. So May, I want to go back to the East Texas of it a little bit, because I imagine part of, of course, so much excitement. You're never going to say no to this exciting television deal, but this is the part of Texas that is in your heart and in your blood and in your soul, right? And this is a place that you know very well, and people that you know very well, and you've written this amazing book with such a voice to it and such great characters. What was that like for you to just think about what was important to you in terms of wanting to do justice to see justice done to those characters in the television version, but also just thinking about bringing this place to life on the screen for so many more people to see? This is May Cobb's East Texas.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. But first, Lou, you're giving me such hope that maybe more people can find my book.
They will. They absolutely will.
Oh, they sure will. Yeah.
Maybe in Italy. I haven't sold any foreign rights to Italy. I'm just being funny. But that would be fun. Anyway, I think what was important to me was, this is going to sound maybe a little unhinged, but I wanted the unhingedness of the book to be captured. And that's the cleanest G-rated way to say it. I didn't want it, okay, so like the first people that optioned it were terrific, but they had it set up at ABC, and that always kind of felt like, wow, I'll take the mailbox money, like Lou calls it. But wow, that will be a big departure. And when Irwin got Rebecca attached, she has this brilliant show called Hightown, and she absolutely doesn't shy away from dark, twisty, complicated female characters doing all sorts of things. And so I knew I was in very safe hands. That it's not so much like the specific plot that I wanted preserved, but I did want that East Texas feel, because it is a really crazy place. And I just think it's normal. But like, for instance, my editor was like, when we were going through edits, was like, well, women don't drink this much. And I was like, lady, I toned it down. Like,
I mean, my mother. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm like, this is my childhood you're talking about. No, so I am. So anyway, they have they have amplified the crazy from the book, and I'm very, very proud of that.
Yeah.
That East Texas was preserved.
Can you tell us where they're shooting this show?
Yeah, it's in Charlotte, North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And it looks so much like East Texas. It doubles so well for it that it's actually uncanny. I'd never been, and then when I landed, I was like, wow, I actually feel like I'm in East Texas. And I think it worked out perfectly, because they have a strong, the Southeast has a really strong film crew base. and they're total pros. And if they had filmed it in East Texas, there's just not a lot to do there. Whereas Charlotte's like 800,000 people, and there's restaurants and stuff where people aren't going to go crazy, you know,
Right,
in a 4-month TV series.
right. Signing up for it. I'm going to get back to you, and I want to, maybe you can noodle on a story from the set that you might want to share with us if it's appropriate. But Owen, changing gears a little bit, because we have you here and we're so lucky to have your perspective, not just as someone who's had your work adapted, but also as someone who is writing original screenplays and directing films. I wanted to ask you, for you as a writer, I mean, I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it for everyone else. Where did you start with storytelling? Was it short stories? Was it fiction? What brought you to screenwriting? And can you talk just a little bit, especially if the transition was from prose into screenwriting, what that looked like for you, for maybe the folks in the audience who are thinking, maybe one day I want to do that. Maybe I want to try my hand at a screenplay.
Right. Yeah. Because I mean, that's a really interesting thing. Because I know, I know a lot of folks in the Writers League, which I'm a lifetime member of.
You sure are,
Yeah.
buddy.
Are like really interested, like, okay, what does it mean to do these different things, and how do they bleed into one another? And that's a really interesting way that they do. For me, my very first novel, way back in the 90s, I self-published, and it got optioned by a small film company, like a really small little production company. And I was like, huh, well, how do you write a screenplay? So I started kind of looking into it. And I was also, at that point, I kind of got a job doing comedy at the Alamo Draft House, where I was making fun of movies, Master Pancake Theater, or the Sinus Shows is called back then. And I watched a bunch more movies, and I was watching movies with people who loved movies, and they were talking about movies, and they're talking about movies I hadn't seen. And I'd always been a movie fan, but like, oh, these guys just really into it. Some really wonderful people. And I started thinking more and more about that shape of film. And so I started kind of putting a hand in both places, and they started kind of affecting each other more and more. That sometimes my screenplays would have a little bit of a novelistic feel, especially in television. But even more so, I was noticing that my novels were having a bit of a shape of a film, that sort of 3-act structure. And so on and on, they're kind of cousins that meet up every so often and swap stories, and more kind of affect each other's mythology in that way.
And I know you mentioned this earlier, but I think it is really interesting the way that for you, short stories can be almost a treatment for Hollywood. And if you want to explain what a treatment is, that'd be great, because I just threw it out there without explaining it. But
Yeah.
and what that looks like for you to actually craft a story that, if it gets published, wonderful, but maybe the goal of the story is to really be the kind of bait to interest Hollywood in doing something with it.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's an interesting idea. I mean, like Lou's novel is like, oh, I'm so glad they made it into a movie. And it was and I thought the movie was beautiful as well. Just like it had a great hook, right? It had a great, like, oh my God. Yeah. Young Edgar Allan Poe, like investigating a murder. Hell yeah, I'm there for that. And that can mean a lot, right? In any kind of story. But, I'm kind of an old school novelist in some ways. I'm like, if it's a person like wandering around a Russian city for 4 hours and thinking about how their relationship with their mom, I will read that novel. I'm going to read Dostoevsky. But then there are certain stories that you're like, okay, this is the shape that makes sense for cinema. And so a treatment, as Becca was saying, a treatment is basically, I'm going to tell you the story of a movie, but I'm going to tell you in kind of prose. But I'm not shaping it like a story. It's a treatment. It's like this happens and this happens and this happens. And that's a tool that we use to try and sell a movie. But also through the history of cinema, short stories and novels have been a place that people have gone to like find those stories. I mean, from the beginning, the earliest movies were adaptations of stories and novels. So recently I've said, well, like, what if I take a short story and write it in the shape of a film? And Becca's known this because I've talked to her about this, but sometimes like I would turn in a short story of mine to my film guys. I said, this can make a movie. And they're like, what are you talking about? It's kind of ambiguous and it's filled in someone's head. And it's got a lot of symbolism. I'm like, yeah, but that's the story part. But imagine it as a movie, like we can't. And I was like, oh, okay, I have to write a short story that has that shape, that has a conclusive ending, that has some of the stuff that I don't like in short stories that I wouldn't put myself, but makes sense in cinema. Like a real clear arc, a real clear character moving from this point to this point to this point. And so I've been writing some short stories that have that shape, specifically in these cases, not only because I love writing short stories and I enjoy that process, but also because I can hand this to someone and go, this would be the screenplay I'd write. But it's all here in a 30-page short story.
So Lou, I want to come to you because your books are they're meant to be films. They're so and I know that Mr. Timothy, am I right, was there's been someone who has been wanting to make that into a film for some time. I don't know if I read correctly.
He tried, yes.
My deep dive into
going back to 99.9% of the time it doesn't happen, but yes.
Right.
No, I've had options on 4 different books, and one got through. So
when you're writing, I think I know the answer to this already, but how does I'm going to get a film deal, that's not driving your creative process, I know, but do you you have a knack for writing these stories that feel like they have the sort of cool narrative hook, what have you, that belong on the big screen. And so when you're writing, are you thinking at all about that kind of other life that this story might have?
No, not consciously, but I grew up with movies. I love them as much as Owen does, as much as May does. So I think they inform your consciousness, whether you're aware of it or not. So I'm always thinking about, the hook, the story, the propulsion of the narrative, how to keep it moving forward. To me, there's nothing more unforgivable in a writer than to be boring, inert. So I'm always trying to find a way to, from the first sentence, and this goes back to my journalism background. I went to journalism school. The lead is so important. Getting hook, putting in the hook from that very first line, telling the reader that I have a story that you want to know about, and here's how it begins, and now just follow me. It's so important, and I think it happens in every medium. It happens in visual arts, it happens in music, it happens in everything. So it's not something I'm consciously aware of, but it's there in my DNA.
Yeah, and that idea of, I love the idea for writers to look to film for inspiration for creating compelling story, as much as we often look to other books and other writers and sort of forget that there are these really wonderful storytellers who are making films that are teaching us about narrative and how you drive something forward. And I'm thinking of the class we have this Saturday that is a great thing that, of course, screenwriters, they have to do scene in a way that is just tight and compelling and moves it. If it's not moving it forward, it doesn't need to be there, right? So to look to these filmmakers for some of that for craft.
Absolutely. Yeah.
May, what about you? Do you tell us, I'd love to hear a little more about as a writer, what has sort of sparked your interest in exploring screenwriting and where you see that being kind of the next step for you on your writer's journey.
I first have to say y'all's like living rooms or whatever are so much more adorable than mine. That I'm sitting here like Lou and Owen could be actually in the same house. Y'all stay. I expect like Owen to come walking through. The door.
That would
We
be
are
an
in the same
amazing
house.
reveal.
We didn't want to tell people. We didn't want to say, but we are. We're together now.
We're very
it.
happy.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I was asking
think-
you about that
Yes.
spark, that desire to work in the medium of screenwriting.
Yeah, I think really, I mean, I lived in Hollywood like 20 years ago, and I was a personal assistant, and I was also given a job writing coverage of screenplays. So I read a lot of screenplays back then, and I really loved reading them. And basically, it's funny, like, I don't know, I've always just been sort of like vaguely interested in it. But then when I wrote my first novel, Big Woods, while I was writing it, I actually like saw it, like one would maybe envision a movie. And I still really want to try to adapt that for television. And so I don't know, I've always like, I don't know if it's the East Texas background, it's so noir and creepy. I just, when I write my books, they're all set there except for this latest one. They're very visual in my brain anyway. And I think I need to just like pull the Band-Aid off and adapt one and see what happens. Because I don't know, I feel like as everything evolves, there's going to be even more crossover with book and film. And I don't even know what I mean by that, but it just seems like, I don't know, I think there's going to be so many exciting opportunities and different ways of being a storyteller. And publishing can be extremely brutal. And so I also would like to work in another lane. Yeah.
Because Hollywood isn't brutal.
I know. I know.
The gentle bosom of Hollywood.
No, I know that sounds ludicrous. But they have the craft service. So
Well, and I think maybe a little bit, I mean, when you were talking about the idea of the crossover, I do think of just creating your world of East Texas, and then the different ways those stories come to life, whether it's on the page or on the screen. And maybe everything, ultimately it'll be the May Cobb universe that we'll be talking about, with your characters moving from one to the other. We'll
like the Shondaverse
for you.
God, that'd be amazing. But thank y'all. But we know that that's what is it? 99.9% the odds are not in my favor. But
this is your chance, May. If you have a story from the set, if you want to dazzle us all and make us feel like we live vicariously through you, is there anything from what you've been up to the last few months? I mean, it really has been a whirlwind, it seems, but
it has been a complete whirlwind. I guess one of the coolest things that happened was they gave me a cameo. Yeah. So the fun part was I got to go into the hair and makeup trailer and take a selfie to send to my mom so she could be like, "Oh, you're actually wearing makeup and someone did something with your hair." And and that was cool. But the coolest part, it was the first day, it was the first time I had met Malin, and she came in to take her seat in the hair and makeup trailer, but she first ran over to me and gave me a big hug and was like, "I've been waiting years to play a character this dark and complex, and thank you so much." And I was like, "No, thank you." So that was really cool. And then of course it was cool to be in it. I don't have a line or anything, but
what is the setting? What is this? Are you in a bar? Where are you at?
Like, it's kind of like a big party scene, and I look like such like a country club,
you look gorgeous.
Like somebody. So that was really fun.
So I want to make sure we have some time for questions. There's a lot of questions that have come in. I have so many more for you all, but I'm going to turn it to our Q&A box for just a minute and see what kind of information we can give folks, because this is a mysterious world as well. These words like option and treatment and all of this. So if a book is optioned, does that put a hold on it? Can you still shop it elsewhere? Is any money exchanged? We kind of touched on that, but I'm going to let you take that one. What's it mean if your book is optioned?
It means, yes, they have a hold on it. You can't shop it anywhere else. They usually throw you some money or a larger part of money, sometimes no money at all. It's a really Hobbesian universe where you just kind of figure, depending on what the property is worth. But yeah, they go away. They have a year to make something happen and nobody else can touch it. And that's what they're paying you for, is the exclusive rights to it.
Right. And then after the year, they may come back and say, you know what, we're going to extend the
renew it,
option.
or we'll just let it lapse.
Or we're going to let it lapse.
Again, more often than not, that happens. Yeah.
And then you just wait for the next person to pick it up.
Wait, yes.
So I'm looking through these to see if there's one that we haven't already answered. So I guess a great question for each of you. What is the biggest lesson, is the question, you learned from your experience from going from book to screen? Something you've told yourself to never do again, or maybe something that just was really either surprising in the process, or that you learned about yourself or about the industry that was really impactful for you. So that's a big question, I know. I'm going to throw it first to Owen, thinking back to some of these adaptations that you've had that have gone to film.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big lesson I had is the one that didn't make it, like with that WB with Book of Harold, and the lesson is, and I'm trying to find the words for it, but to not chase a shooting star. What I mean by that is, in this particular group, I know we're a bunch of writers, and we're novelists and short story writers and screenwriters and all poets, and what we do really well is putting stories onto the page. And sometimes I think, Hemingway talked about, like, when he would sell the rights to a novel or short story, that he would stand on the border of LA and throw his book in, then throw the money out, and he'd run to not get involved. Because I think there's a bit of a quicksand of how many projects don't happen. And you're like, well, why don't you do this and change this and work on this? And you find yourself working sometimes in LA years and years on something that's very, very good and will never be seen and never be read. And books have a chance, poems have a chance, short stories have a chance to come out in a way that doesn't cost somebody millions of dollars. And sometimes my lesson myself is, sometimes I get so distracted by the maybe, what if, and the sort of false glitter of those opportunities, that I forget that my job is telling stories, and to remind myself that waking up and typing on a page, that's what I do.
Yeah.
I just want to add that the authorship of a film is so fraught and complicated. Owen knows this too. Sometimes the WGA has to convene a panel just to figure out who wrote the damn movie.
Yep.
And they literally look at competing drafts and figure out how many of the lines of that movie got their way into the final, the script got their way in the final movie. And the fact that you even have to do that, to me, is an advertisement for being an author.
Yeah.
Because everything I put onto the page is mine. An editor may have intervened, but those are my words. A film's authorship is so muddied and so fraught and vexed, So it makes me actually grateful to be an author.
Yeah, that's a great point. What about you though, Lou? Do you have a particular takeaway or thing that maybe you wouldn't do the same? I mean, it sounds like you had a pretty charmed and good experience with
I do have a charmed experience. No, I'm good. I'm not complaining. No,
Did you have a cameo?
I didn't have a cameo. I will just say my one story is that I was terrified of meeting Christian Bale because I was told he's this method kind of nightmare. There's a viral thing of him blowing up at I think it's a DP on Terminator. It has millions of views on YouTube if you want to listen to it. He swears in American. He's Welsh,
Yeah.
but he was method enough to swear in the accent of his actual character, which I thought was great. So I thought he was going to be. I thought he was going to be pretty scary, but he was a total gentleman. And then I will say one story in his favor too is when they were wrapping up the filming. I thought this is weird. They brought him copies of my book for him to sign.
Oh,
Like, oh, well, that's interesting. And he actually said, it's like, I don't want to do this. Can you just check with the author to make sure he's okay with me
Wow.
doing that? So I was like,
cool.
okay, Christian, you're good. You're good.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I love that. That's great to know about Christian Bale.
Yeah, right. He's still nuts.
May, May, what about you? Got a lesson learned or a particular thing that, I mean, you're in the thick of it and you're having a great experience as well, it sounds like, but anything that, is it too early, too soon? Gotta give yourself a little more perspective.
No, I think, I think just going back to what Owen said, just remembering that, like, I like to wake up in the morning and write words and not really get too attached to everything else, because it is so easy. We're at the midway point through filming, and so I know it's going to be finished and I'm going to be sad. And so I'm trying to motivate myself to work on something new. And, you know, the odds, like, are so crazy. So anyway, and I think also whenever something does get optioned, like Lou said in the very beginning, option does not mean green light. I really knew that, thought I knew it, but I still thought when it first got optioned, I was gonna move to Bel Air and be a member of the Soho House. And wow, I was not correct. Yeah. So yeah, it's very humbling. Hollywood is very humbling.
I will say though too that and you can tell me if this is not your experience, but in my time when I worked at an agency that was a talent agency, so I would go and work with my colleagues. I worked in the book literary department, but I found that a lot of my colleagues on the film and television side were really enamored of book authors. They really felt like, wow, this is like they write books, they're important, they're weighty, there's so many words. Like there was just this kind of, real reverence in some ways of my clients when I would say, oh, do you want to meet this novelist? And it just was a big deal. Not that they had read their books or would.
I was going to say,
I mean,
I'm sure
they would give
read
they give the books to the assistants. The assistants tell them about the books, but the idea of that, I don't know if that resonates with any of you as something that you've seen as well, but it is nice to see that kind of positive feeling towards authors. Owen's looking at me, I feel like.
No, I think they just look upon us as Martians, or yeah, just like what do they do? They what?
They spend how much time on that?
I think there's also a little bit, right? Like we're always enamored by the art that isn't our own, right? Like, I mean, because I do comedy too, right? And but comedy always looks like, as novelists, it's like, oh my God, I couldn't do that. And then novelists look at jazz musicians and go like, damn, I wish I could do that. And like, no one's anybody else. And I think we sometimes in the book world that we get, and this is, I think, what I was talking about before, is like we get falsely enamored of how cool movies are, because movies get big billboards and, movies get big news, and movies have award shows that have, red carpets, and we have probably less of that, but we're talking about books that are 15 years old and 150 years old and 1500, like we go back with books. Books last in a way. And so I think one of the cool things is to remember, like, we really are that cool. If we, so
Thank you, Owen.
Yeah.
We were joking before this started, Sarah and I, about, what are those royalties for Shakespeare? Because Hollywood seems to pull a lot from Shakespeare and other maybe no longer with us authors as well. So last question I'll ask you is just more of a fun to learn a little more about you guys as also fans of movies. What is just to go circle back to where we started it with our attendees, what is your favorite book to film adaptation? And can you tell us why? I'm looking for something maybe that you read the book and you saw the film and it just was present company excluded. Obviously, your first answer should be The Pale Blue Eye, but who wants to start? I'm going to go to you, May. Is that putting you on the spot?
It's okay. No, this is not going to be like that original of an answer. And I don't even know if this is necessarily my favorite, but I think, The Godfather,
Oh.
It's
Yeah.
a better movie than a book.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
Nice. All
Yeah.
right. We've got one for The Godfather. Owen, what do you got for us?
I had said adaptation earlier, but I don't know. I mean, Tarkovsky's Solaris is maybe one that I really love. Like, I love the novel. It's an incredible novel, and I love the movie. And Stalker, similarly, like radically different from one to the other, but in a way that I so appreciate maintains the same melody in a really wild way. So I think those two would be big for me.
There are two Solarises, though, right?
Yeah, I'm not. I'm talking
Not the
We're
about.
George
talking about the
Clooney.
Clooney Solaris.
Not talking about George Clooney. No offense to the George Clooney. Talking to Tarkovsky, who's was a Soviet filmmaker. He was a Russian filmmaker.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Lou, how about you?
Oh God, I'm going to embarrass myself and go back well before I was born. Is that all right?
For sure.
So, The Maltese Falcon.
Oh.
A superb book and an equally superb movie, very faithful to the original book. This is what amazes me about both the book and the movie. It's just people sitting around talking.
Yeah.
There's somebody's dead somebody died somewhere, but it's just people sitting around talking, and it's unbelievably suspenseful. And that's a tribute to Handmaid. It's a tribute to John Huston, who adapted and directed that movie, and the actors. But it's a movie where people sit around talking, and the suspense is so intense because it's just about who has power over the other. Anyway, I'm fascinated by that movie, and I never stop wanting to watch it. So.
That's a terrific one. Thank you.
That's a great answer. Yeah.
Well, folks who are listening in, I want to remind you that one of the best ways that you can support writers is to buy their books. And we would be remiss not to. We've dropped the link in a few times, but to remind you that we do partner with the indie bookstore Book People here at the Writers League of Texas. We love our independent bookstores all over this wonderful country, and especially in our fair city here. But so if you follow that link, you'll be able to pick up copies of The Pale Blue Eye. You can pick up The Hunting Wives. You can find Owen's most recent novel, Hollow. But also just such a great way to, after this conversation, if you want to go see what you are going to be watching on your small screen, big screen, and read it first, that's the place to do it. I want to thank all of our panelists so much. What a delight to be able to spend this time with you, but also just each of you, your perspective and your experience. And it feels really pretty amazing that we managed to lure you all here tonight. So thank you. Thank you so much. And folks on YouTube, thanks for joining us. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your evening. Go do Framed, even though I spilled it. You already forgot. You already forgot what the answer is.
Thanks,
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. This has been great.
Take care. Have a good night.